Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. I got a great video for you today. I'm going to do a direct comparison of two very popular wildlife and birding lenses for the Nikon system. This is the 180 to 600 6.3, and this is the 600 6.3 PF lens. Stay tuned for my thoughts in a direct comparison right after this. Been dying to do this video. I've got my hands on both of these lenses. I'm overlapping, so these came from B&H. I rented the 180 to 600 first. They sent this to me to try for 30 days. I asked them for an extension so I could overlap it with this lens, and so I've been able to shoot them both at the same time and do some controlled experiments. Now this lens, I did independent reviews of each of these, so I have a review of this one and this one down in the playlist. You can check under hardware, but you'll find those very interesting and much more in depth. With all of my reviews, these are going to be based off of practical experience. So while I will get a little technical with you, I really do try to keep this more practical. So instead of shooting test charts, I'm going to try to shoot real subjects or try to set up some situations, maybe using a fake subject where I can be at the same distance with two different lenses and all of the other variables are the same. So I do try to do some of those tests as well. So you'll see some of those comparisons coming up in this video. I really think you're going to like this one. And at the end, I've got a bonus for you. I tested a couple other lenses just to see how they stacked up because I was able to shoot a few other lenses at the same time. So stay tuned for the end of this. I'll give you some bonus content. The way we're going to break this down, I'm going to go through build quality, going to go through optics, some of the characteristics of each of the lenses, and I'm going to grade them out. Basically, who wins and by how much in each of these categories. We're going to get started with build, but before we get there, we got to really start with price. There is a pretty big difference in the price of these two lenses. So this 180 to 600 is going to run you about, and you may see my eyes veer a little bit, $1696.95 on the B&H site. And this one is going to run you $4296.95. So that is, if my math is right, this is less than 60% of the cost of this. It's $2,600 less. That is really a lot of money. So we'll talk about the value, because while the price may be lower, is it a better value or is it just cheaper? We'll talk about that price at the very end when it comes to value. But I do want to jump in here and get started with build just to show you some of the difference of these. And again, this is going to be a little quicker video. We're going to move pretty fast through here as a comparison. If you're interested, there's chapters at the bottom. You can skip to the end and hear my final thoughts. But I won't take too much time on this one. I'm going to move pretty quickly because I've already done the reviews of each of these independently. Let's start with the build quality. The first thing you're going to notice is weight. So the PF lenses, by the way, are going to be lighter across the board. That is a phase Fresnel technology. I'm not going to get into what it means. Just know that it is a weight-saving optic system inside this lens that reduces both the size and weight. So you can see while they're the same focal length and at full aperture, this one zooms, so at full zoom, they're the same aperture. You will notice this is both smaller and it is lighter. So I've got the weight up here. This is I'm just going to round it off. It's around 3 pounds, a little bit over 3 1/4, and this is around 4 1/4. So about 25% lighter. In terms of the controls on this and the build quality, this is an S series lens and this is not. S series means it's getting Nikon's highest rating on build quality, both optics, things like weather resistant and sealing, and just overall build. I mentioned in the first video, this has a tripod collar that is detachable. This is the 180 to 600. I did not like that tripod collar. This one has a different tripod collar and it is much smoother. So you can see like right here as I rotate this, very smooth. And when I rotate this one, oh, it's just a little choppy in there. So there are some quality build differences, but not exceptional. The biggest thing for me is this is not an external zoom lens. And that was really, really important when I reviewed this in the first video, just really keying on that feature. So S series lens, it's lighter in weight. So it's got a lot of advantages in terms of construction. And there's a few other controls that are different. If we looked at this lens, it's got one function button here. This one has a function button here and at the top. So it's got two function buttons. And it also has a memory recall button. And that's really convenient if you want to focus in on a certain distance, hit that memory recall, it gets you there right away by hitting one of the other function buttons. So a little bit more advanced in terms of control. Now again, we would expect this at $2,600 more. It's got to give some more bells and whistles, and that's exactly what we're seeing in terms of the build quality. At the end, I'll rate these out, and you'll see that this build quality is overall better, and it's more convenient and functional, and it's a little bit lighter. There's a couple other things I want to talk about with these lenses, and most people, what they're really going to care about is the optics. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about optics. I'm going to switch screens, bring you some visuals for this one. And let's start with two of the less important things, and that's vignetting and chromatic aberration. And what really most wildlife photographers care about is sharpness. I'll do plenty of examples around sharpness. Let's jump over to the other screen for this. Now, optically, we're going to talk about vignetting, and I'm going to spend almost no time on this. Vignetting would be the darker areas around the corners. If you really want to test vignetting, the best way to do it is shoot a blank, like gray wall, a light gray wall, and then you'll look for dark corners around the outside. In an environmental photo, it is minimized, so you won't see as much of that. So with wildlife photography, vignetting often isn't detected, even if the lens has some. I'm going to tell you with both of these images, this is the 180 to 600 up here, and I did some control. These are controlled images, so I'm on the same tripod. You'll notice slight movements, but on the same tripod, same distance, same weather setting, everything's the same. You'll notice there's nothing noticeable here. In fact, there's just a tiniest difference in focal length or distance that the lens was placed because it was on the tripod. And so that it's a little darker in one corner, but that's really just the shadows that are in the background. I'm going to tell you, don't worry about vignetting with either one of these lenses. They're on par with each other. Chromatic aberration. Now, chromatic aberration is a little bit different. You won't see it until you get zoomed in. So we're gonna go in here a little bit tighter, and we may even actually go in a little bit more. So we'll go in at about 200% on this one. Chromatic aberration is going to be seen around these light to dark transitions often, and it normally involves the cooler tone. So sometimes green, but often magenta and blue, cyan. So those are the colors we're looking for. Often we'll show around the whites and around the edges. And the only place you can almost really, if you're pixel people, I have to go in a little bit more, is right around this blue head. You may not even come through on YouTube. It is so minuscule. This is the 180 to 600. It's so minuscule, it's irrelevant. I'll just show it to you on the other lens. Let me just zoom this over here. Okay, so that's the 600 PF, and then that is the 180 to 600, all right? You could just tell there's nothing here, guys. So we're not gonna worry too much about chromatic aberration. We're not gonna worry about vignetting. What we really wanna look at is sharpness. So I'm going to put these two images up against each other. We will also talk about bokeh in a minute. I drop that under characteristics of a lens, not the optics. You could put it in either category, but don't obsess with that. We'll talk about bokeh. Spoiler alert on bokeh, they're essentially the same. 600, 6.3, 600, 6.3. You would expect bokeh to be the same. And if you look at these, you could see there's almost no difference between this and this in terms of the background. So if you just look at the background, you'll see that they render almost identically. I'll show you some other images at the end, and you will see a difference with different lenses because I do have some bonus content at the end, so stay tuned. All right, what really people want to talk about now is the sharpness. So I'm going to crop this in, and I'm going to true this up. So I'm going to put both of these subjects tight as I can get them, tail to head, and I'm going to line them up even with each other. And we're going to look at these two lenses. Now this is the 600 6.3. I'm not going to zoom in yet. We'll get there. And that is the 180 to 600. Now if you are looking at this on my YouTube video, you're not going to see a difference. So I will have to get in a little bit tighter. So I'm going to stay on the 180 to 600. I have some comparisons coming up on this as well, so I'll get you in a little tighter. Let's look at these feather details down here. And in my review of the original lens, I had no problems with sharpness. Now we're gonna see a slight difference, but we're gonna focus on this one for a minute. Okay, now let's switch over. And this is this is the 600 PF lens. And we're gonna look at that feather detail specifically around here and then up around the head. Unfortunately, my test subject doesn't have great eyes. I had a different test subject. I lost it. I don't know where it is. I had to get a new one. His eyes aren't as good, but I like the feather details down here. This does give you a pretty good indication of detail. So if I toggled it back and forth, let me go up to this head. If I toggled it back and forth, 600 PF, 180 to 600. Coming through the video on YouTube with a little bit lower resolution, can you tell a difference? I'll put them side by side. If I do it this way, if I zoom in and toggle, there is a slight difference in sharpness. The 6.3 PF lens is ever so slightly sharper, but I don't want to overemphasize this because I think people can overvalue sharpness of a lens for wildlife photography when it's this close. Now, I'm not talking about a mediocre lens. I'm not talking about your iPhone. What I'm talking about is two lenses that are so close to each other in sharpness that you have to toggle back and forth at 100 or 200% to see the differences. I've always preached this. Yes, lenses matter. Absolutely 100%. But some people think that that having a lens that is a hair sharper will take better images. And at this point, an award-winning image could be captured with this lens and nobody would know the difference. So I promise you, it is more about technique and field work and light and composition and artistic merit. That is what's going to separate your photography. It's not going to be the difference in sharpness in these two lenses. I want to make that point because I think it's a big deal. Yes, you can see a difference. I'm going to go one more time. 6.3 PF lens, and that's the 180 to 600. So yes, you can see a difference. When you peek in that close, you can see a difference. When you're zoomed out to a regular viewing distance, you're not really going to see that difference. Now, I will put this up for comparison. So I'm going to do a full screen here. Side by side, I'm going to invert these images so they face each other so you really can see the differences. And I'll label each of these and I'll let you look at them for a minute so that you can really get an idea of the difference in sharpness. So I'll make the point one more time. The 600 6.3 PF is slightly sharper. Without test charts, these are just test images of, I'm going to say a real subject, but it's as close as I can get to a controlled environment with a subject that looks like a bird. Pretty close, right? So yes, a little sharper, but pretty close. So when we look at optical quality overall, if we looked at all of that, what we're probably going to say is no difference in things like chromatic aberration and vignetting. Bokeh is pretty much the same on both lenses. You're not going to notice a significant difference in bokeh. What you are going to notice is a hair of sharpness differences. I'll grade these out at the end to give you my feelings on this, but you could probably already tell, for the price especially, is it worth it? Like I'm leaning, it may not be worth that $2,600 difference in price. I'll give you my thoughts on this at the end. Let's talk about the last part of this, and that's going to be the characteristics of the lens. So what is it about these lenses that separate them from each other in terms of characteristics? Because there are some big differences in characteristics. Now, I told you I had some bonus material, and part of the bonus is around bokeh. Now, bokeh, I've explained this before, the ability to render out of focus areas. It doesn't have to be background. It can be foreground or background. And I've got 4 examples up here, and I want you to start looking at these while I speak. You're looking for differences. Particularly if you look down in the lower left-hand and lower right-hand corners, you're going to see some of these, they're probably stalks from the plant, little stems. Look at how blurred out they are. So part of bokeh is its ability to render out of focus areas. And what does it look like? How creamy is it? You'll hear this referred to as the blur of a background. So the better the bokeh often is associated with blurrier backgrounds or creamier backgrounds. Do any of these look creamier? And these are all between 500 and 600 millimeters. I had the ability to get 4 lenses at the same time, which is very, very interesting. And I put them all on the tripod and tested them. Now, let's look at the left-hand side. Do those look significantly different to you? Do they look at all different to you? I will tell you, from my eye, that it was very, very difficult to tell the difference in those two. Go to the top right. Does that one look a little different to you? To me, it does. So maybe you see that now that you're looking at it. And look at the bottom. Does that one look a little bit different? So here's where we're at. I'm going to put the lenses up there. The 2 on the left-hand side are the 2 that we're talking about today. The top is the 180 to 600. The bottom is a 600 PF lens. And you can see in terms of rendering background, they are almost identical. And you would sort of expect that. They're both 600 millimeter with a 6.3 aperture. So that is about what you're going to expect. The lower the aperture number, the creamier the background will be. The shallower the depth of focus will be. So when we go up to the top right, you're going to see a little difference in that lens is a 560 and that one's at f4. And that's where you get that creamier background. So it's just a function of the aperture relative to the focal length of the lens. This is not a video about specifically depth of field in bokeh, but it gives you a nice comparison on lenses. And what I really wanted to do is focus on those top 2 because I want you to see that they are almost identical. Now, the bottom left, that's actually the 200 to 500 PF lens adapted. And because it's at 500 millimeters, it's a little bit shorter. And that combination of a 5.6 aperture and only 500 millimeters is going to render more of the background in focus. It's not going to feel as creamy as the top right. Does that make sense? This is a little bonus content for you. Hope you appreciate that one. I've got a little bit more bonus content coming up for you in just a second. Now, as we segue this conversation from the bokeh of the lens, and I hope you enjoyed that bonus material, and we start getting into the characteristics of the lens, I've got a few characteristics that I really wanted to hone in on and talk about. So we're going to talk about things like the autofocus speed, the vibration reduction or that stabilization, magnification, which I haven't really talked much about, and then versatility. So let's start with autofocus speed. And for both of these lenses, the autofocus speed is very good. The 600 to PF autofocus speed, going from the minimum focus all the way out to infinity, it's going to take you about half a second. With the 180 to 600, it's going to take you almost a full second. So it's twice as long. Now, on paper, that sounds like the PF lens has a huge advantage, and it certainly has an advantage. However, in practical shooting, depending on what you shoot, it may or may not make that much of a difference. Let me give you an example. I'm shooting a subject 15 to 20 feet away. I start at minimum focus. The amount of time to acquire focus on that subject is negligible. When I was in the field shooting songbirds, and I shot a lot of songbirds, thousands and thousands of frames with both lenses, I couldn't have discerned the difference between the two autofocus speeds. Most of my subjects were between 10 and 30 feet away, and the autofocus speed seemed the exact same. I couldn't tell the difference. However, if I was hunting, so let's say I was shooting a subject and I missed focus and it went out to infinity and came back, and I missed focus again and it went out to infinity and came back. In those situations, that's where you're going to notice the difference. So for the majority, the vast majority of shooting, you're not going to see a difference, or you're not going to feel a difference in this autofocus speed, but it is measurable. And if you miss focus, or if that lens starts to hunt, that's where you're going to notice the difference in autofocus speed. Was not, again, for me, it was not a major concern. Very similar to the sharpness, you know. When I look at these things, I try to say, like, practically, do I feel it? Now, I have used other lenses, thinking back to my days with Nikon, and there are some lenses that felt much slower, just felt slower. Never measured the 200 to 500 autofocus speed. But when I used that on my mirrorless system, I can tell you, it literally felt slower. I could feel it. Never measured that lens in terms of timing, but it felt slower. Some of my other zoom lenses, they felt slower. Most of my prime lenses are having a very similar, whether it's the old 500 f4 or 400 2.8, you know, any of those really nice prime lenses felt really, really fast. Here's the nice thing, that 180 to 600, it felt snappy for a zoom lens with my experience with Nikon lenses. So I'm going to tell you yes, the PF lens is faster. Don't worry too much about it. Don't get obsessed with it. If you're a birds in flight photographer, maybe it matters a little bit more because you tend to miss focus once in a while. Well, at least I miss focus once in a while. And so reacquiring that focus can be a little bit more important. Vibration reduction, both of these lenses boasted 5.5 stops of reduction, and a lot of that done in combination with the body. So I'm going to rank these and just say no difference in these. I didn't notice a difference in VR. If I did, I'd let you know. Magnification, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on. Because in magnification, we do see a big difference. Now, magnification is tested at minimum focus. And these two lenses have two different minimum focuses, and that's critical. If we are looking at the 180 to 600, it has the ability to focus at 600 millimeters down to, and I'm rounding numbers off, around 8 feet. Here's the interesting thing. And when I did my full review, I mentioned this and I showed a picture of this. At 180 millimeters, it goes all the way back down to almost 4 feet. So it comes all the way back, and you can get a subject that lands literally right in front of you in focus at 180 or 200 millimeters. And you just don't have that option at 600 millimeters with the PF lens. If something comes inside of that minimum focus distance, which is significantly more, you're out of luck. You can't take a picture of it, mostly with songbirds for me. So there are times when that minimum focus can be used to your advantage, and that provides more magnification. I'm just closer. So as I get closer, magnification increases. The magnification of the 180 to 600 is 0.25. The magnification for the PF lens is 0.15. I've explained that in their individual camera reviews, so if you have a question about that, go to those individual reviews. I'll give you more detail there. But just know, The 180 to 600 has an advantage when it comes to magnification, and it has an advantage when it comes to minimum focus distance. Now, for some photographers, that doesn't matter. If all of your subjects are at 30 feet, irrelevant. But if you're like me, and you're lucky enough to have those subjects come close, or maybe you do some other type of photography. You like to shoot butterflies. Sometimes that's convenient to get a little bit closer. If you like to shoot reptiles, sometimes it's convenient to get a little bit closer. So just know that you have an advantage there with that 180 to 600. The last one I want to talk about real quickly, and I'll do this in the comparison in just a minute, is versatility. And clearly, the most versatile of these two lenses is the 180 to 600, just based off of that zoom feature. I've mentioned how impressed I was with the internal zooming of this lens, and I really, really enjoyed this. So when we talk about the other, I guess, characteristic to consider with these two lenses, it really is going to be around that versatility. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about value, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on the value comparison with some bonus material. So let's get into the overall reviews. How did I compare them? How do I stack them up next to each other? Let's take a look at it right now. Now I've got the screen up, and I am ready to go through category by category. I'm going to list them all over here. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to compare or give the edge to one lens or the other. Now I'm using a 3-star system for this one, meaning that if one lens is significantly better in the category, it gets 3 stars. Most of these are going to be pretty close, but you're going to see some differences there. And I'm going to break it in the same way I did the other format. So kind of like build quality, optics, and then some of the lens characteristics. We're going to start with weight. The 600 PF clearly is a winner in this category. It's just factually, it is 25% lighter, a little over, and it is a pound lighter. Now I'm going to give it a 1 star because it's not significantly different. So it's not going from a 6 or 7 pound lens down to a 3 or 4 pound lens. It's going from about a 4 pound lens down to a 3 pound lens. Definitely the advantage to the 600 PF. Also advantage to the 600 PF, build quality. This is an S series lens. It is on paper going to give you better weather sealing, better optical glass, and it's going to give you a little bit more in terms of controls. So under build quality, I'm also counting those extra buttons, those controls that you get. I'm going to give that a 1.5 star advantage to the PF lens. Now in the optics, I'm going to call vignetting a push. I don't think it's a factor for either lens. I showed you on chromatic aberration. Maybe the PF has the slightest advantage in chromatic aberration. I'll give that a 0.5 star advantage, probably not significant. And in terms of sharpness, that 600 PF is going to get a 1 star advantage, meaning it is ever so slightly sharper. If you skip to this part, I want you to go back and view those sharpness comparisons. You will see a slight difference, but I'm telling you, the point of this is not to say which lens is the sharpest. It's to compare the overall features. And when viewed overall, that has to play a factor in. Does that sharpness really matter relative to things like price and build quality? So ever so slight advantage to the 600 PF. Now, I transition here and I go from those optical qualities into the characteristics, and bokeh is in the middle of those. So this is the bridge. Which one has better bokeh? I just showed you they're the same. However, I'm scoring this a 0.5 point advantage to the 180 to 600, and why? Now, I did not observe this at shooting it, but I read a lot of articles on these two lenses, and I have had people say that the PF lenses do not render out of focus areas specifically around specular highlights. The construction of a PF lens is actually different. So it's got a different shape to it. I'll try to put a visual graphic over here so you can see what I'm talking about. That could be the reason that occasionally it can render these specular highlights, these out of focus bokeh balls, with some odd patterns in them. I did not observe this, so I need to put that out there. However, I need to be fair and say, I have read it, and there appears to be a slight issue with this. I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. I certainly wouldn't grade it significantly either way. But in terms of grading the bokeh, I did want to give a 0.5 star advantage to the 180 to 600, and I wanted to explain why. Autofocus. When we talk about the autofocus speed, I mentioned this before, under the lens characteristics. The 600 PF, about a second from minimum focus to infinity, and, about 0.5 seconds, and the 180 to 600, about a full second, so it's twice as slow. It would seem as though that's a significant difference. I'm going to give a 1 star advantage to the 600 PF because in the field, honestly, when I was shooting songbirds, I did not notice it because most of my focusing was going between 10 and 20 feet. So in that small distance, did not notice it. You will notice it when it hunts. So when it's going out to infinity and back, so maybe you're shooting a bird in flight and you lose focus and that lens starts to hunt back and forth, that's when you're going to notice it. So you're going to notice it in that long, those long periods of hunting. You're not going to notice this autofocus when you're in a shorter distance. So for that reason, I am giving a 1-star advantage to the PF. I have to, but I don't think it's significant enough to say that autofocus speed should be a deciding issue with either of these two lenses. So that's my summary on the advantage and why I scored it that way. VR, vibration reduction, didn't see any differences in this, so I'm going to grade those equal. And here's where you're going to see a little bit of a change. So right now, if you're looking on paper, look at everything is a plus for the PF lens. Everything, exception maybe of bokeh. Here's where the characteristics of the 180 to 600 kind of kick in, and you see some advantages. One, the magnification difference. I explained that difference in the minimum focus distance and how it equates to magnification. It's a pretty significant advantage for the 180 to 600. You can shoot closer. That's just an advantage in general. I can shoot a subject that lands really close, and I get better magnification out of that lens. So, 2-star advantage. Versatility. This is a big one. It's a 3-star advantage. The 600 PF lens can never be shorter than 600. The 180 to 600 has this zoom feature, and it's sharp pretty much throughout the lens. By the way, 500 is probably the sweet spot on this one, but 600 had no problems in terms of sharpness. I showed you that. That's a 3-star advantage in terms of versatility, and it's hard to argue that, in my opinion. And then maybe the most important factor for deciding on the 180 to 600 is the value. I'm giving this a 2-star advantage. I mentioned some bonus content in here, and I'm going to show you real quickly some bonus material around value. Now, I'm grading the 180 to 600 as a 2-star advantage in value. I think it's a very solid value, maybe the best in any wildlife lens for the mirrorless system. There's one other lens as bonus content I'm gonna tease you with, and it's because I think in terms of value, it's a better value than the 600 PF lens. Which one am I talking about? Let me put an image up to explain the two differences here. On one side of this, you will see the 600 PF lens, and on the other side of this, you're going to see the 400 4.5. We don't talk about that lens in this review, but I do want to bring it up because I have had a chance to shoot this lens, and I will tell you, when shooting these two, the 400 4.5 is more versatile. The 400 4.5 takes a teleconverter very well. If you add a 1.4 teleconverter, you are now at a 560 6.3. Very equivalent to the lens that we've been talking about here today. My question is, with a teleconverter, is that 400 millimeter lens as sharp? Now, I had 1 day of overlap with these. I didn't get extensive use, but I was able to take a picture. I'll put it up here. I tried to take a picture that had some graphics and some texture, and I found this little jet boil that I had sitting in my car. On the left side of this image is the 600 PF, and on the right side is the 560 6.3. So in other words, it's a 400 4.5 with the teleconverter. On this, I can't tell a difference. So I'm gonna leave it up here so you can pixel peep me for a little bit. I couldn't tell a difference. Now, I don't know, I have to assume that the 600 on a test chart is going to be a little sharper. But real life, I couldn't really tell a difference. I'm putting it out there not to do a direct comparison video, but to mention it. I'm talking about value. The 400 millimeter lens is $1,000 less and may be providing you the same build quality and the same optics at 560 millimeters versus 600 millimeters. It might be very, very close in terms of optics. So it's cheaper, it's lighter, and you can take that teleconverter off and get more versatility. You can get all the way back to a 400 4.5, which allows more light to come in, maybe allows you to shoot more scenic environments. So I'm going to mention it here in value. I think in terms of value, that 180 to 600 I mentioned is the best value in wildlife lenses for the Nikon system, the mirrorless system. I think that 400 4.5 is a close second because of that versatility, the optical quality, the weight. There's a lot of pluses there. So again, not a direct comparison video, but I'm mentioning that as bonus content. I hope you appreciate it. And that kind of wraps up, I'll put it back up here for you. That kind of wraps up the summary of how I felt about these lenses. Who are they for? I'm gonna make a very simple case for the PF lens. If money's not an object and you like that weight, get the PF lens. It's a lightweight, great optical quality, great build. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but it's a comparison video. When compared to the 180 to 600, who's that lens for? That's for somebody who's a value shopper. Maybe it's your first great lens and this is going to give you optical performance that is very, very close to some of the best prime lenses made by Nikon. It's not going to get you there. It's not going to be the perfect lens, but it's going to get you real close, and it is going to cost significantly less. This lens, that 180-600, could also be a great addition for a videographer who likes that zoom feature, who likes the ability to go in and out with the zoom, even during recording video. So it's really, really nice feature that it has. And it's for somebody who wants versatility. So if you want one lens that can do perform multiple functions, the 180-600, great versatility and great value. That's really what this lens is all about. Now, I hope you found that video helpful. Let me know down in the comments, have you used either of these two lenses, and do you agree with my summary? Did I get it right if you've used both of them? And was it helpful maybe in determining which lens you want to purchase in the future? Let me know down in the comments. I'm going to put some affiliate links down in there. Again, B&H let me have these for 30 days. Actually, they extended it for me, so thank you, B&H. The links down there are for B&H. They're affiliate links. They don't cost you anything extra. They help support the channel, so I appreciate you using those links if you decide to make a purchase. So thanks for tuning in today. And as always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.